discretion is advised.
What is the most terrifying thing that happened during a Zoom call? My friend is a special ed teacher. A student recorded a brief clip of an inopportune moment and almost got him fired for inappropriate behaviors, harassment of a minor. He was playing a harmonica and briefly had his back turned to the computer. The student turned down the volume on his computer and said my friend was simulating oral sex. There was an investigation and he was cleared, but it was pretty traumatic for him. It was mandatory to keep our mixing cameras on and my parents were having a screaming match in the background. Maybe not terrifying, but it was horrible. Last year, a student of mine logged on and told me her mom's boyfriend hid her mommy and her mommy was sleeping in the bathroom and wouldn't get up. She said she was scared and had her toddler sister with her under her bed. I stayed really calm, told her I was going to help. The other kids started joining. I told her to stay on, no matter what I said to everyone else. I grabbed my phone and started texting my boss and every other person in our school. Another teacher who I'm close with ran into my classroom. She was a champ and started reading to the kids. We called the police, sent them to our address on file. They were not at the address listed in our contact information. Another parent gets on and is telling me to mute the girl. She isn't supposed to have a sibling in Zoom. The toddler was crying. More people in my classroom are trying to help. I tell everyone but this kid to log off, she's in kindergarten. Can't really read yet. Started begging me not to end the Zoom while trying to calm her sister. This other mother is being a cunt. She telling me how long I'm legally supposed to Zoom and all this BS. The principal steps on screen and tells her really nasty to read the room, ma'am. Get off. Everyone but the first kid and one other student log off. He's this really kind boy. I tell him I need him to go, other student is asking over and over, not me, right? I want to stay on, I'm scared. He starts comforting her, we are frantic. We start asking her where she is. Can she get a phone? What does the house look like? All that stuff. Officer shows up at our school. We call the HR. We hear a man yelling at my student to quiet the baby. I felt complete horror and dismay and helpless. The officer who came to our school, small town, knows the family and might have an idea where they are. He sprints out after talking to her and asking her mother's name. We keep trying to comfort her but she's upset. Like an idiot, I had set my Zoom for 45 minutes and time is coming to an end. I tell her I'm going to send another link, but it cuts off. Every teacher and administrator is now in my class. We all feel helpless. Same questions from everyone over and over. Just a couple minutes later we get word the cops have found her. I fell on my knees and started to cry. Boyfriend had in fact beat mother. He was arrested. Mother wasn't, as far as I know, in the throes of addiction. Little girl and little sister live with grandparents in another state now. At the middle school I used to go to, a teacher got assaulted by her boyfriend. Apparently he didn't know her entire class could hear it, and it was recorded as well. They were not on camera, but the threats and sounds were enough to arrest him. Edit did a little research, and it was actually filmed as well, and a video of it circulated online for a while. The latest update is a month later, and the guy was being charged for abuse and the teacher was still not working because of the trauma. A personal social nightmare. During a discussion-heavy class I was taking last year, I had a question that turned into a 2-3 minute back and forth with the teacher as they expounded on my question. Just when they were redirecting the convo back to their PowerPoint slides, one of the girls in the class wasn't on mute and someone in their room, I guess their roommate or something, said, "That guy has such an annoying voice," and the girl responded, "I hate hearing him talk. Every time he opens his mouth I'm just waiting for him to shut up." Teacher reminded everyone to mute themselves, and the girl got wide-eyed and muted herself. We could see her tell her roommate about it and then laughing, but they didn't apologize or anything. There was just a few moments of silence, and then the teacher moved on. I stepped away from my computer for a bit and barely ever said anything the rest of the semester. Edit, thanks everyone. It means a lot to hear all these positive words. I was giving a university lecture on Zoom. I only require camera if it's an evaluation. One of my students was speaking, camera on, and her dad shows by only wearing a string. He realizes that the camera is on and makes a quick escape. Oh my, I have so many questions. The strangest although not terrifying thing that happened when I was giving a Zoom lecture also university was that when one of the students was answering a question I'd asked, we heard a sheep suddenly go by. Turns out he lived on a farm and there was a sheep right outside his window. Multiple shots being fired at the apartment across from me. I was on my weekly team call when it happened, and I was asking a question. So I was unmuted. I went holy shit those are gunshots and hit the floor. All my team saw was me throwing my headset off and frantically rolling off my couch. Supposedly my mic picked up me calling 911. Don't get involved with drugs everyone. There's a chance people will come and try to shoot you in the middle of the day. Was on Discord with friends and hopped in a work call early. I forgot I switched calls and walked away from my desk with my headset on to go get a snack before the meeting. Someone said hey in real life name. Thinking it's a gaming friend, I blurt out the duck. Since when do you call me in real life name? Was not a gaming friend. Was the CEO. I work for a startup, so I luckily have a decent relationship with him. I realized my mistake a second later and mentioned that I'd been sitting in a call with friends while working today and apologized. He luckily laughed it off with me and never brought it up again. Last year during the Dixie Fire in California, Cal Fire set up a Zoom meeting to give a state of affairs for residents who were evacuated. It was a public meeting. Whomever hosted didn't understand how to mute people. Some dudes came on and started saying utterly offensive and disgusting things. For 10 minutes. Every bad word, insult, vulgarity you could imagine. The Cal Fire team didn't seem to understand how to mute people or how to read the comments telling them what was happening. My husband was a fireman deployed to that fire and I was pissed. Just wanted information. At the end of 2019 I was at the office in London and on a Zoom with about a dozen other folks spread across the US. Got some pretty shocking news during the call and felt a cold sweat come on, a light-aided sensation, and then searing burning pain in my chest. I'd suffered a massive heart attack and apparently managed to say I need to go and then pushed my chair back from my desk and just collapsed. Thankfully it was still working hours and the office had people in it. So my teammates got me into a safe place, grabbed my nitro spray, called an ambulance, etc. And all was eventually well. I ended up having a quadruple bypass not long after this. Had it been an hour or two later in the day I'd have probably died as the office would have been empty. Blind kid in a Zoom class at the end of last year during English. I see out of the corner of my eye he's the only one with a camera on. Teacher was chill, if we didn't want them on while online. Starts stroking his soldier in front of half the class and the teacher. Teacher kicked him from the class without saying anything and continued on with the lecture like nothing happened. Poor guy probably didn't even know. But yeah, that was a very jarring English class. Edit. I apologize for everyone that replied saying they also witnessed someone jerking off in a class. And I'm sad this apparently isn't a rare experience. This story happened to me on my second day of training on my first ever job. So I just graduated in June 2021 and found a job in October 2021. I used to use Zoom for all my university classes, but for work, they use Microsoft Teams. So I'm not familiar with that at all. On my second day of training, we have an important meeting with the vice president of the company. The vice president keeps babbling about things that I do not understand because this is only my second day. So I'm just ducking around and I right click him. So I see three options I think. Mute, spotlight, pin. So I'm like mute. That sounds impossible. How can a person who is on their second day of training be able to mute someone, let alone the vice president? So I think about it for a bit and go oh, it would definitely mute it on my side only. So I clicked mute. It works. I muted the guy from my side. I tried to right click and look for unmute, but it didn't work. Until a couple seconds I hear people typing in the chat and also speaking up hey, "Vice President, we can't hear you." So he unmutes himself and says, "Somebody just muted me." That's hilarious. At this point my heart is beating hella fast. And this meeting had 150 plus people in it. I typed in the chat, "Sorry, didn't mean to do that." Then tried to unmute myself to apologize, but it took some seconds to register. And then when I told my co-workers, yeah, I definitely didn't mean to mute him, I see to my horror that the unmute button worked and everyone heard me say that. Vice President then jokingly told me, "You should muted yourself, not me." Overall, he took it pretty well and is a super laid back person. But oh man, that was terrifying. I thought I was fired for sure. Saw a guy's wife beat him over the head with a purse. He was on mute and no one else on the call had noticed. I had to interrupt the call to ask if he was okay. Apparently, the wife had been abusing him for a while and this was the final straw that made him leave her. At a company I worked for, in a Zoom meeting with a data center the CEO was talking to because they were thinking of purchasing it. A bank of industrial ups caught on fire and the fire suppression systems began going off. For reference, they had a system that worked in this order: 1 chemical extinguisher, 2 a chemical that removes all oxygen from the room, 3 water. 1 failed, and the dude who was in the room was out the door only seconds before 2 went off. Barely made it. Shouldn't have stopped to try to put out the fire. They did not buy the DC, but they hired the tech. Not terrifying but real second-hand embarrassment. We were on a Zoom conference call with our marketing agency. We were their biggest client by a mile, but our relationship had become strained as they weren't delivering results. The purpose of the meeting was for them to introduce a new account director and B, to present the results and action plan back to us. Our marketing manager ironically called Karen was giving them a real hard time. The new account director shared her screen, but inadvertently shared her Slack on the screen where her and their whole team were chatting shit about us in real time as they were presenting. This included calling Karen a real Karen, and I bet she'll ask to speak to the manager, and saying that they'll have to stop lying to us soon. Karen let them keep it on the screen the whole time, and told them at the end. The account director cried. Attended a Zoom wedding, and one old couple didn't know you had to self-mute. Just prior to the wedding beginning, the wife off-screen yelled, "Toilet paper. I need toilet paper quick." Then just after the wedding ceremony finished, same lady said, "That was the most boring wedding talk I've ever heard." My brother was on a Zoom interview for a job in England early in the morning in my basement, where we had our computers set up, and I used to have my room. I crawled across behind him to avoid being seen in my underwear as I needed to get some clothes from my old wardrobe. My brother later told me he could clearly see me crawling across. I jokingly say his interviewer told him, "Your sex slave is escaping." Funny enough, he got the job. WFH had just begun, and we heard a partner at my firm taking a piss. Everyone heard the sound of the waterfall in the toilet, and then the flush, and then the hand washing in the sink, and the door closing. Other audience on the call, other junior and senior partners at the firm. I was an admin, so I ran the agenda of these meetings. Didn't regret that role. My professor was teaching, and she says, "Hey guy, this might sound weird," then passed out and completely fell back. It was really scary, but a few seconds later her husband came and was like, "Duck duck duck, sees the Zoom class is cancelled, ends meeting." She emailed later explaining that she easily passes out and it's never happened while teaching. Great professor and a very kind-hearted person. Not Zoom, but back in the old TeamSpeak days, we were all in a call and a couple of our guild were from South Africa. All of a sudden there's all this shouting and noise coming from one of their mics. Muffled, but you can clearly hear stuff like, "Who the duck are you?" and "Get out, get out." Followed by 2 gunshots and silence. He was just left there in TeamSpeak. We're all shouting, and the other guy from SA doesn't know the other guy's full real name, or where he lives, etc. So we're all powerless. Just this ghost sat in TeamSpeak. By the following morning he'd disconnected SND. We heard nothing for about a week. He eventually just appeared online one day and told us how he'd been broken into. They'd killed his 2 guard dogs and the gunshots were just into the ceiling to make him compliant. The worst part was he told us it wasn't the first time it had happened and gave the other SAC guy his details in case it ever happened again whilst we were in chat, so we could call the police. I have two not terrifying but one weird one NSFW. One right after lockdown and everyone was forced into using Zoom meetings. A guy used one of those background images. Well, he was wearing a black turtleneck and the whole time he looked like a disembodied head floating in outer space. I personally have an oversized monitor, so I can see even the small little faces very well on Zoom. Guy was in a shirt and tie, all seemed normal, but he kept making some very unusual facial expressions, and actually at one point clamped his hand over his own mouth. Then suddenly and very briefly the back of a woman's head popped up. Most people tried to pretend they didn't see anything, but there was one guy who kept asking whose head that was, and why they were listening to our meeting, and just on and on. People became more annoyed by the guy asking questions than about what they had seen. I remember it was in the middle of math class when all of a sudden we heard loud barkings and faint screams in the background. My teacher kept going back and forth checking up on what's happening and at the same time trying to get back to solving a math question. At one point our teacher broke down in the middle of teaching and revealed that her kitty got mauled by the dogs. It scarred me till this day because of how loud it was and how everyone was freaking out. Not Zoom, as this was pre-Zoom in the early 2000s. Anyhow, back in the day a friend of mine, since I was 12 we were both in our early 20s at the time, died while in a video chat group online. This group of people watched him overdose on camera, egging him on, then couldn't figure out how to contact anyone once he passed out. His mother found him dead the next morning. He taught me so many things. And because my mother was afraid I would be kidnapped if alone as a teenage girl, my platonic friendship with him gave me freedom that I never had before. If he was with me, I could leave the small suburban street I lived on. I could go to the park, bike to the 7-Eleven for a Slurpee, go play some hoops, shoot his potato cannon. He got sucked in by drugs and had one rehab attempt under his belt when his mental health and addiction collided with the aid of peer pressure to result in his death. I saw the chat. The people egging him on were just horrid. I wish he had the chance to pull himself out, as I feel like he was one relapse away from redemption. He was so tech savvy and quick to learn. So much he could have done in the world. RIP. I was on a Zoom call for work right after the pandemic started. My wife and I were both working from home, and the schools and daycares were closed too. Normally we divided up our day so that one of us was working and the other taking care of the kids. One day though we both had online meetings at the same time, so we turned on the TV and told the kids to just watch TV until one of us was done. I had my headphones on so that I wouldn't be distracted from my meeting, and at some point I see my wife quickly get up from her chair. Then when I looked at my screen at the window, where I could see myself, I saw my 3-year-old behind me frantically clawing at her throat and trying to cough. She was choking on whatever snack she had been eating. My wife was too panicked to really do anything and was just screaming and basically pulling her hair out. I hopped up, leaned the kiddo forward and just started smacking her on the back. Luckily she coughed it up, started crying, and I gave her a big hug. A minute or two later I sat back down to my meeting, put on my headphones, and then realized everyone else in the meeting was just sitting there in shock because they'd witnessed the whole thing. Not terrifying from the outside perspective, but it freaked the soul out of my body. It was senior year of college during COVID year. I was living on campus. My girlfriend H was a commuter student. Both of our classes were online. So she would come to campus every day, and we would join our respective Zoom classes while sitting together and cuddling. We were sitting in the Divinity School kitchen, ironic, I know, while I was in a Zoom call with my camera and mic turned off. The kitchen was empty. So as things go by we start making out. We have been making out pretty intensely for a while, until I hear my professor calling my name fairly loudly in the Zoom call. I froze and could literally feel my soul ascend from this mortal shell. Then I slowly turned to my screen. Turns out my mic and camera were still turned off, but the class was over, and the professor said he would stay back to take questions. Since I was the only person left in the call he thought I stayed back to ask questions personally, and that's why he was calling out my name. My wife was on a call delivering virtual training to some new foster families. Her computer is located at the back of our dining room study, looking back at the room and giving a good view of most of the door from about waist height upwards. The door doesn't latch anymore, so it can be pushed open fairly easily. My wife had shut the door before she began the call to keep any of the background house noises from interrupting the session. She was about halfway through when our dog decided to investigate the strange voices coming from the room. The dog knows he can use his head to fling the door open, but the camera was angled in such a way that you could see most of the door, but not the dog as he came trotting in. So from the perspective of the people on the call, it appeared as if the door had been flung the open with no one the other side. It was quite comical listening from the other room as a group of fully grown adults shrieked in terror, and then my wife having to explain it was just the dog. I was onboarding a new employee online as we were in 2 different cities. She was in her bedroom at home, and during our conversation she told me not to mind the background noise as her mom may be going in and out of the room. No problem. Got it. Her mom walks in and stands in the back of the room, completely in frame, and stares at the computer for a minute. Then proceeds to get completely naked while maintaining eye contact with the call the entire time. My face was so red, I didn't quite know what to do. My colleague tried to move her head body, so she blocked her mom in the background, which didn't work. Told her onboarding was about done. I still don't understand what was going on. We never spoke of it. Was in a massive Zoom meeting for work, and someone either hacked into the call as a sick joke, or the radio communications of a nearby EMS had actually crossed into our call. But we suddenly all hear the sounds of someone trying to calm down a screaming woman who was wailing about her car being hit by a truck and how everyone is dead, and that she couldn't find her husband's head anywhere. Meanwhile, you can see everyone's faces drop in horror during the call. The company sent out a big apology email later, saying they were looking into what happened, but I never heard more. It was the most horrible, nauseating thing I ever experienced. Gave my husband a huge hug afterwards. Pre-pandemic, working for fairly high-end glamping company near Yellowstone. My days off included Tuesdays, which was also an important weekly management Zoom meeting that I was expected to join in if I happened to have signal. Well, this particular Tuesday I was hiking up high on the Continental Divide around 10k feet elevation and had plenty of signal to call in and join the meeting while enjoying a sub sandwich and beer in a beautiful large meadowy saddle. Zoom meeting on my phone when a grizzly bear passes through about 150-200 yards below. It never smelled me, but I was pretty certain it must have smelled my sandwich and came looking. Fortunately, it just passed along and out of sight in direction opposite of where I was headed. Click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.